This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At the Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience. All right. Cut that out on the edit, Landon. It's because I had to hit the button.
Yeah.
I distracted myself. Thanks a lot, Zach. Thanks. You know what?
Sorry,
leave
Landon.
it in. You know what, Landon? Leave it in. I'm going to leave it in for our editor. That's Zach's fault. That's why we messed it up. But I'm going to take it. Should I take it from the top? Should I take it from the top or should I go from the middle, Zach?
I don't care.
Since you messed it up, so I guess you just tell me what to do.
I don't care.
Okay, we're just going to go from the middle. At the Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience by digging into God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey with us. That's Zach, that's Adam, that's Jake. Guys, today, the last 3 weeks, we've done 2 chapters of Genesis, 3 chapters of Genesis, and then 2 chapters of Genesis, but we're back down to 1, okay? We're going back to our old ways, but I will tell everyone in the audience that throughout Genesis, there are going to be times where we're going to be covering multiple chapters, so just keep in mind, if you don't listen through the end of the episode, you won't know next week exactly how much ground that we're going to be covering, so do keep that in mind. But guys, we're going to get into the call of Abram. So right from the beginning here, we will take a volunteer to read the first 9 verses of Genesis 12. Whoever would like to hit it, ready, set, go.
Dibs, there's no hard names here. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had, and gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the toward the Negeb.
So
going toward the Negeb.
This is one of the biggest promises in the entire Bible, that a great nation is going to be established through this single person. And there's nothing here that tells us, exactly why this person or, what qualifications they had to be the number 1 overall draft pick. There's nothing really like that we see with Abram. But the ESV study Bible, which again, guys, I get asked a lot, like what version of the Bible do you study? But then it's like, what Bible should I buy? I personally am a fan of English Standard Version. I think at this table right now, we have ESV, and NIV. And so like if you're an NIV person or NASB person or all that, you're still good. Just like something like the Message, that is not a translation, that's an interpretation of the Bible. So you have to be incredibly careful with something like that. But the ESV study Bible, for my money, cent for cent, is the best Bible on planet Earth, because you get the ESV version, but you're also getting the notes. And the note from verse 2 is great nation, which is the word used or the phrase used in verse 2, stands in stark opposition to Sarai's barrenness, right? Ooh. Because we're about to, yeah, exactly. As soon as I read that, I was like, yeah. And so when I take notes from other places, I'll bring them over here to my notes so it's easier to recall them on the forging table. But you have to think about that. And then I want to kind of open it up for discussion. Dale Brisby was on the show last year, so he's kind of a rodeo personality guy, and he and I talked about this off air, but then we talked about it on air. His mom, I think he says, took a vacation for a couple of years. Like she basically abandoned their family for a couple of years, but his father stayed unbelievably faithful that it would work out in the end. And he said, I just saw my father through this entire situation. I just could not believe the faith that he showed that mom was going to come back. And here's the thing is we already know the end of the story. His mom was gone for 2 years and then she came back. But while they were going through it, his dad didn't know that. He didn't know it was going to be 2 years. And so when I was because again, we record these well in advance, I was doing an event with Church 1122. Every year they do something called Encounter. It's a hunting experience where, Jake, you asked last week about, how can you get close to God? And here we are, all these guys were at this plantation and we're all doing, when we're whitetail hunting. that, guys, this may be the first time they've ever been in the woods, but, we send them out there, not with entertainment, we send them out there with a devotional. And so they're reading through the devotional material. They've got stuff that they can write down. They've got prayer and all that. And so it's kind of the first time that they're close to God. I was out there at this camp, and there's one guy that, brought some weights and all that. So we got a workout in. He's a real strong guy. His name's Hunter Hanks. And, so we're deadlifting and we're doing all that kind of stuff. But then it's like, all right, well, you're kind of a beefy deadlifter guy. And, I can deadlift a little bit, but not as much as you. But then it's like, I'm going to wait till the end, and then I'm going to bring you into my world, which is sprints, just explosive cardio. Like, I'll tell you we have one more, but actually it's 10 more, and I'm just going to go until you die. And like, that's just kind of the things that I like to do for fun. But I asked him a question. This is all going to correlate and come together, I promise. I asked him a question at the end, because my sprint workout is, the warm-up is 6 40-yard dashes with basically no rest in between, 4 20-yard dashes, 4 10-yard dashes, and then the workout is 10 100-yard dashes with only 30 seconds rest in between. So it's literally 100, you take 30 seconds rest, get back to starting line, and then another 100, and you do that 10 times. But the last one, with the last rep, I look at Hunter, and we're on a country road. And so we're just, we're guesstimating how far that tree is away and all that kind of stuff. I say, Hunter, are you willing to sprint until I tell you to stop? Are you willing to sprint without knowing the distance? And he laughed, immediately realized I was serious, and goes, yes, I'm willing to do that. I said, okay, well, I will run beside you at your pace, and you will stop when I say. And he was like, bet, let's go. In a lot of ways, that's what God has given the scenario to Abram, right? To Dale Brisby's dad, it was, okay, we're going to sprint here, basically where you have to be patient and know that I am God, but you don't know how long it's going to go. Because it's one thing to say, hey, are you willing to sprint 300 yards? Because it ended up being about a 300-yard sprint with the last 40 being on a hill, right? He didn't know that. But in his head, he's like, I just agreed to sprint. I don't know if we're going to go 50 meters or a mile, right? But he had already agreed that I'm going to sprint. And so that's the thing that was just overwhelming to me when I was rereading the story of Abram and the call of Abram, is God's basically saying, dude, I got you. I just need you to put your yes down, right? Give me your yes, and I will take care of the rest. And if anyone knows the story of Abram, that's not exactly how it worked out, but that's where I wanted to start this discussion, because as much as I gut checked him whenever I put him through that brutal workout, and it's brutal even worse because mentally you don't know how far you have to go. But this is life in a nutshell. And that's just at least how I experience and how I live it. I feel like God has asked me in a lot of ways, hey, I need you to put your yes down, and then we'll deal with the details later. And that is a scary proposition. So just wanted to throw that out there to kick off the discussion. Yeah,
I think probably all of us here can point to a situation where I think maybe God has asked us to just sprint, if you will, and not know really when we're going to stop, what the destination is. I know for me, and I think I may have shared this story on the show before, but I remember
we get new listeners every week.
Yeah,
so
all right,
feel free.
Good. So for me, whenever I was about 8 years into my public accounting career, I had worked crazy. I mean, I was working 3,000 hours a year. And I was in the 8th year, and I was trying to move up and, working at a huge firm. And I remember going, I lost my mom that year, and I was like just devastated. Then go through maybe the roughest busy season I'd ever been through. And I start just going like, I'm quitting. I'm done. I think they finally broke me. I've worked more hours than ever. Miserable. I'm going to go see what else is out there. I get an offer from another decent sized firm to come over there. They were going to give me more money, had a path to partner. And I just was like, oh, great. Awesome. Get this offer, take it to my partner at my previous at the firm. And I was like, so I have another offer. And he goes, oh, he's like, well, it was a Friday when I went and talked to him. He goes, can you let me have the weekend to see if there's anything we can do to keep you? I said, I owe you that. So he goes home that weekend, and I come home from my wife. I was like, well, I showed the offer to Mike, and here's what they're doing. She's like, Jake, you're making a lot of big decisions here. Have you prayed about it? I said, no. And she goes, don't you think you ought to? I said, yeah. So I walked into our room. I tend to pray alone. As I've said to Kyle before, the scariest sentence you could say to Jake Winkler is, Jake, will you please pray for us? So
I make sure he does that every time I get the chance, for sure.
But I tend to pray alone. And so I went and prayed, and I just felt like God was really just reiterating, you stay. And I was like, stay? I mean, okay. So I came out of the room, and Stacy's like, so, okay. And I was like, I looked at her and I go, I have to stay. And I messaged now, the natural inclination there would have been like, well, he's going to go try and get me more money, maybe get a promotion, whatever. And I went and got my phone and I texted him immediately. I said, hey, just want to let you know, I've prayed about it. I'm staying. And you don't have to give me any more money or anything, nor promotion. Like if you were waiting on a response, don't worry about it. I'm staying. And I just was like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be here. But I was like, okay, well, maybe God has a purpose for me here. And I'm not lying when I say the next 2 years were rougher than the previous 3. Worked more hours, more stress, more politics, more drama, just not fun. And then COVID hit, and then I ended up getting, passed over, and then got passed over for a promotion again. And I was just like, I'm stuck. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so during COVID, I just started reaching out to random people, not for job hunting. I was just like, I'm stuck. I'm not going anywhere. And was just talking to random people that I was just catching up. And I actually called one of my previous mentors, who was a partner at the firm before me. He had retired and then was working remotely from Costa Rica because he had the greatest life ever. So I call him and just like, so how's it going? He goes, well, it's going pretty good. He goes, how's things going at RSM? I said, oh man, it sucks. I'm miserable. He goes, well, would you be interested in hearing about another opportunity? And it's where I'm at now. And so, but even then, whenever I was just like, oh, I'm going to take it, I'm gone. Stacy goes, did you pray about it? And I just felt very clearly, like when I prayed that time, God was saying like, this is why I told you to stay. And as I've said on here before, I don't know why he has me here. I don't know if I'm going to be greatly humbled or if I'm going to have great success. I don't know. But either way, it's what God wanted. And so I have to be thankful for it.
Well, and I think, cause I would love to hear from Adam and Zach, certainly. But to even tee you up, Adam, because I'd like you to talk about this, but you can ultimately talk about whatever you want. Because, just so everyone knows out there, I didn't preempt anybody with where I wanted to go with this discussion. I just thought it would be interesting for us to kind of work this out. And I think you've probably talked about this on the show before. I think it may have been at a former forging table, but I mean, we have listeners that have never heard a single episode. This is the first one they ever listened to. So it's okay for us to repeat stories from time to time because they're helpful. But obviously, you were working at your father's firm. You're also a CPA like Jake. And you had your life mega planned out, and all of those plans had to do with your dad being alive. And all of a sudden, very suddenly, your dad was no longer alive. And again, just as a side note, that's like when guys are like, Kyle, what's your 5 to 10 year plan for Undaunted? And I just giggle. Mm-hmm. I'm like, bro, I'm doing things with Undaunted that I didn't even think existed 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. And like, I think God looks at our long-term plans and is like, that is so cute. That is so unbelievably sweet. I got something different for you, because it makes no sense from a logical point of view or from a business point of view. Like any mentor of yours in the business space, any secular mentor would have been like, you have to do this, Jake. You're going to run yourself into the ground. But for Adam, I would like for you to talk about that, because you were very young in your career. You didn't have the sway that you certainly do now. And all of a sudden you walk into the office, your dad had just passed away, and you got a bunch of people looking at you like, is this the kid that's going to keep us all to where we can, live indoors and eat food? So take it from there.
Yeah, man, I was 30 years old at the time. It was almost 10 years ago, 30 years old. A firm of 10 people, and I'm one of the youngest guys in the door. Almost everybody at the time working at the firm is older than me. My dad was 60 years old, unexpected, and just passed away one day, gone. And we had just hired my best friend who was going to come because we had so much work we didn't know what to do with that. We brought in my best friend who worked with me at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He took a job at KPMG and was in internal audit. So he had just made a giant switch from North Carolina to come to Oklahoma to do small business accounting. So he was, way out on a limb. And the goal was to make him partner eventually, 3 to 5 years down the road. And, I had just gotten into the partnership myself at, 30 years old. I'd started at PricewaterhouseCoopers when I was 24. So I was 6 years in, and I was not ready to run a firm. And I remember walking in after burying Dad and having to talk to the staff and basically tell them, stay with me. I don't know where we're going, but we're going to do the best that we can. And then I remember meeting with every single client, and we lost a substantial number of clients because I wasn't Dad. And, who's this 30-year-old kid who I've never met? I'm not going to trust them with my finances or trust them to prepare my tax return. So, it was a difficult time for sure. Not ready to be 30 years old running a firm. And something that I created in that moment that I don't know if I've mentioned on this show before, but I've mentioned to a lot of people is I have this list on my phone, and I call it the things I've survived list. And this is all related to work. And I've got 13 things on here. And so these are things that I would list as when they were happening, I thought it was over. Doors are closing, clients are gone, life is over, business is over. I'm going to be looking for a new job. So this is something I would encourage everybody to do because it's easy to forget all of these things that we've survived and just live in the now and be like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I go look at this list. And I look at it, oh, well, that was way worse. This was worse. I thought this was for sure going to be the end. And if I can get past my dad passing away and being 30 years old and not knowing how to run a firm, not know how to do any of those kinds of things, nothing else can be as difficult as that was, So that's what I'd say about that.
I mean, what that
list, the flood recedes, right?
Right. And what that list is, Adam, is that is a narrative of resilience. And so there's another concept that I give to guys because, every now and then I come up with something and someone's like, oh my gosh, that's the thing. This is something that has landed with a lot of guys. It's the concept of I've seen me do that before. And so I always describe it in the context of physicality because that's the easiest for most of us to understand because we either do that or we don't. There's not really a whole lot of in between. But let's say you go to the gym. So if you work out like most people at a Globo gym or something like that, so you go to the gym and you just don't feel well that day, right? So maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep the night before, had a bad day at work. You're coming home to a wife that's not really satisfied with you, like y'all are fighting or something like that. You get to the gym, you kind of like, go through the motions for about 15 minutes and you just go, you know what, screw it, I'm out of here. And then you just leave, right? Well, you've seen you do that before where you go to the gym, you know what you're there to do, and you cut it off a quarter of the way in, a fifth of the way in, something like that. You've seen you do that before. But given the same circumstances, you go to the gym and you finish your workout, you've seen you do that before. Like you've seen you do that, right? With these sprints. So that sprint workout that I described earlier that I did with Hunter at Hunt Camp, that's the same workout I do here. And I also do the same thing to myself at the end where I run a much longer final sprint. And a lot of times I'll do that workout after lifting. So after squatting or after deadlift. And so I'm already dead. And yet here I am, sprinting, which, no one likes to run. No one likes, and worse, no one likes to run fast. And so, but if I've ever quit on that, I've seen me do that before. And so if you've seen you do something over and over and over, it's easy for you to continue doing that thing. But if the thing you've seen you do over and over and over is not finish or quit or to wuss out, then it's going to be easier for you to continue that behavior. However, if you've been resilient and if you've overcome, you've seen you do that before. And so you go to that list, and what, Joby has encouraged guys to do is a gratitude list. Like you have a list on your phone, you have at least one thing that you are grateful for every year that you're alive. And it can be everything from as big to your salvation, your marriage, your children individually by name, or there's things on my list like I love opening day baseball. I like UFC nights I like being able to hunt at Adam's land, your land. I like, being able to do back porch cigar and whiskey nights. And so it's an entire breadth of things, but it's like, look, I have 38 minimum things that I am grateful for. But man, what a tremendous thing to have in the notes section of your phone as well to like, hey, here's the crap that I got through, right? Here's the stuff that I've seen me do that before. And the do that before thing was I got through it. So
yeah, I love that, Adam.
Yeah, I have a tendency. I'm glad that you mentioned earlier that your wife encouraged you to go pray because that is a weakness of mine. And I hope, Jake, you feel the same way that I do, possibly in that I feel like I have to come up with the answers. And I'm not trying, this sounds awkwardly self-edifying or self-gratifying that I can figure this out, but that is my weakness. I feel like when I'm presented with a problem or, I need to find the solution, I'm going to figure it out. I rely on myself way more than I should.
Well, not to turn this into a mini therapy session for the CPAs.
We're already in. Let's
but
go.
I would say honestly, I think it's a lot to do with what we do for a living. I mean, the amount of times people just turn to you for answers, whether it be tax planning for you or, we've got a problem and we don't know what happened. For me, I work on the audit side. So, financial planning. I mean, I tell people all the time, when I tell them I'm a CPA, they immediately jump to, oh, well, I have a tax question. It's like, I don't know anything about taxes. I know nothing. And the amount of anxiety that gives me, because it's like, I know you're looking at me and I should have answers for this, but I don't have answers for this. So I think there is something to just what we do is kind of a profession where people just kind of turn to you looking for answers on something that they clearly do not understand. And they frankly, that's why they pay us, is they don't want to understand it. They want you. I always say the CPA profession is, it's not you don't have to be good at math to be a CPA. It's basic arithmetic. It's a translation profession. It's basically I take this information that's very complex to understand, and then I break it down into something that's very, very bite-sized chunks. It's very easy to understand. So I think it's just more in the profession. And yeah, for me, it's like I'm looking for answers. Where's the last place I turn? God, unfortunately.
So when I come to you
Yeah.
for an auditing question,
Yeah.
and you give me great answers, right? Or anybody that does, that's a conversation that we have. And you have a pretty good understanding because there's a code and all sorts of things that you can measure your answer against. When you go to God by yourself and you pray and you come out with a conviction that's strong enough that you send somebody a text message in that situation,
Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And I'll just frame it with just this simple statement.
Yeah.
I'm not confident that I understand how the mechanism of following God works. And what I mean by that is I've spent time in the past praying, asking, looking, and things always can work out differently. And then I've gone into, well, let me make sure I'm asking all the right folks, consulting, lots of scripture and so forth. And let's see if we can amass all of that from godly people in my life. So I'm just interested because it does seem to me from the outside looking in that you took what you perceive God told you and went down a path that seems to has enabled you to bless other people in multiple ways.
So far, so good.
Yeah. So what is that? How is that just some sort of a settling inside for you? How would you describe it?
I actually think it's reflect that you'd have to have the perspective of the 2 years that I followed. So the 2-year gap between
When you stayed.
when I stayed.
Yeah, that's hard.
The 2-year gap that I stayed, again, worked more hours, but I will also tell you, I got the worst evaluation of my entire career. Mainly because I had during that time frame, whenever I worked so much and I just lost mom, my attitude was crap. And I think most of you know me well enough that I'm overall pretty positive and upbeat and jovial and, and I generally take that into the office. But I was not at that point, and my head I just wasn't right. And I would say they could have done probably a better job of helping me along with that. But at the same time, full accountability on my end. Who has control of my attitude? I do. Who has control of whether I'm happy or not? I do.
Yeah.
And so I got a horrible evaluation that summer. Affected my bonus, affected my compensation, affected a lot of things. And so I remember they specifically around like, okay, technical skills were good. You brought in work, you've done all these right things, but your attitude sucked. And so we're grading you down to this. And I was just like, you're never going to complain about my attitude again. And I had this little bit of I'm going to prove it to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be just completely fake up here. And then, it was that day I learned that literally you could literally faking it until you make it is a thing.
I've seen you do that before.
I fake a good attitude.
Yeah.
I fake a good attitude, and suddenly I just have a good attitude about things. To the point now where I just say, I love fake people. They're always nice. So
the Canadians are the fakest people in the world.
Fake. You're fake, but you're nice. It's fine. So, I mean, what I would say to me, there was a pruning. And it was like, you think you think you can do this. You think you've earned this. You think you know exactly how to do this. You don't, because there's things that God needed me to do. And you know what? It's not like I'm perfect. I still fall back into it. Like my attitude, sometimes I get a bad attitude. But I think one of the things that I learned in that moment was, if you're going to be in a leadership role, and that includes in your own home, if you are a leader and you are showing anxiety and you are showing anger and you are showing uncertainty to the people that you are leading, compound that, because they're feeling it even more. So if you can't feel and be steady to the people that you're leading, it's going to be a problem. And I think that's the thing that I learned, and I'm still learning it. That being said, you can't just bottle all that stuff up either, which is why you need a foxhole group. I got to be able to talk about that stuff. I feel this. It sucks. I'm miserable, but I'm fighting through it.
Well, and you also, in addition to that, recently, and it's not my story to share, so I'm not going to share it, but there's a member of the Forging Table alumni who has lost his job, and he was very upset, right? And he talked to me on the phone, and he was in tears at one point, and it was around the fact he's like, I can't look my kids in the eye right now, because you just feel so low, you feel so worthless, you feel like maybe it'd be better if you weren't here anymore. And I talked to him on the phone, and I heard him, and I'm shocked. This will be a shock to you guys. Not a super empathetic guy. Don't have a whole lot of compassion and all that. I'm a little bit more of a driver and those types of things. But in that moment, I did what I could to acknowledge the pain he was feeling. And I could acknowledge it because I've had the rug pulled out from underneath me before, and lost a job. And I was put on the unemployment line at the same time as like 500 people from Chesapeake that was part of their layoff. And I was like, oh, great. There's a new race I have to run, and there's 500 people on the starting line. This is fan-freaking-tastic. But I remember telling him, I'm like, you get today. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you get today to be sad, to be angry, to go get a baseball bat and do what John Eldridge did, which is go to the backyard and beat up a trash can with your baseball bat. You get today, but tomorrow you get to work. Like tomorrow you get to work, because it's like, and I told him, I was like, because he was starting to catastrophize, like, we might lose the house, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to pay for this, how are we going to pay for that? And I was like, do you honestly believe that me and the rest of your foxhole boys are going to let your kids starve? Do you honestly freaking believe that? No. And he's like, no. I'm like, all right, you get today. Give me an update tomorrow, right? Get those tears out of the way today. And I'm like, don't give anxiety to people that can't fix your situation. Those kids can only gain anxiety. They can't give you a single thing that'll help you fix your situation. So you go there and you lie to them and you tell them it's going to be okay and dad feels great and all that. And tomorrow you get to start fixing it, right? Again, you don't have a foxhole. You don't have guys that can talk to you that way, right? I tell people all the time, Adam, I use you as an example, like, because I go to these events and all that, and I'm the podcast, go, oh, you got a fancy podcast, blah, blah. So people will laugh at my jokes that aren't funny, and I'm like, oh, boy, that one shouldn't have got even a giggle, and we got these guys laughing. I need guys that are completely unimpressed with me and have no problems interrupting me. No one interrupts me. Y'all do. Adam does. Like, I'll be in the middle of something, and Adam, you've literally, and I'm like, no, Adam, and you're like, no, actually, Kyle, what you're going to do is you're going to let me finish what I was saying because you're wrong. Right. And I'm just like, F you. No one likes your stupid face. How about that? And then I slit your tires and I get over it. But like at the end of the day, again, this all does kind of come back to the same themes of, if you don't have those people in your life, if you don't have people that are willing to drop everything they're doing to come find you, to come like, give you that bit of advice that's going to at least get you to the next hour or something like that, bro, you're missing out. Like, and when trouble comes knocking at your door and you don't have that, it's too late to start trying to find those guys.
I think one of the things you said, lie to your kids. You know what? You're not lying to your kids.
Right.
Who's in control whether this is going to be okay or not? It's you and the Lord, and that's it. Turn to God, and it will be okay.
Right.
I mean, so he'll lead you where you're supposed to go.
Right. And again, guys, this really wasn't my plan for the first part of Genesis 12, but I do think that this is valuable. Zach, you haven't had a chance to really share. You don't have to by any stretch of the imagination, but everyone else has kind of shared something. But there is a story here. And I mean, I've heard Jordan Peterson talking about it, who's, a secular intellectual, about like, this is the call to the man's heart away from comfort. And we live in a society that is like, strive, work those 3,000 hours this year so that you can be comfortable, so that you can Pay the person to mow the lawn for you, pay the person to clean the house, pay the person to take care of your taxes. Why do all those things? So you can create a buffer between you and anxiety that people that don't have money can't do, right? And yet we live in this environment where we strive and strive and strive for comfort, and all we're doing is choking ourselves, which is fairly uncomfortable. But whatever you would like to share, feel free to go on before we continue on in this chapter.
I probably don't have a whole lot to share, with the exception of just saying that, at least through my experience, there seems to be a peeling away of what's important and what I think I'm aiming for. And a lot of that comes back to what the Bible says is a rich life, is a good life. And I promised you I was going to bring this up, so I'm going to. Andrew Huberman in his Sean Ryan show podcast recently, I thought was phenomenal. And it's because he spent a lot of time talking about himself, his circumstances, his evolution into faith, along with Sean Ryan, who's done the same thing. And I've recently watched Eddie Penny, who a lot of those guys in that community talk about. And one thing that he mentioned was his difficult upbringing, which I knew about. But he went to Hawaii and met with a guy who he described as this big, tough guy for some reason. And they had a conversation, and this guy, for some reason, had some credibility. But he made this statement, something to the effect of, hey, no matter how far you go down the path and how fast and how quick and all that stuff in your life, you're always the same distance from the ditch. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was interesting about that is it certainly parallels some of my experience, where I've had a lot of very fortunate opportunities in my life to meet with a lot of people, mentors, you name it, leading teams, all that kind of thing. But I've had other experiences after all that stuff where I felt like I was right in the ditch. Right? And that stuff peels things away. And so I think the main thing I would just say is, I think we don't know what the next step is, and going and praying to God seems to be the only solution that I have. But, going back to what you talked about with, you felt very convicted to make a decision. I think that's incredible. That's something that I would love to be able to get to. I just don't know what that looks like.
Do you find yourself intentionally not seeking God in prayer because you know what the answer is going to be, or you feel like if you get the answer, you're not going to want to follow it?
No. I mean, I have certainly done things and followed through in situations where it didn't make sense. I didn't want to do it. It didn't make sense for me to do it, And and that's the other part of it, is in hindsight, of course, a lot of those things seem to parallel and work out.
Clear, yeah.
And I would just say, generally speaking, for me, hopefully it's working toward character growth. Like you're talking about the pruning, I feel like that's ultimately what God's trying to accomplish in some way, shape, or form. One of my big visions for my life is trying to become what I always call, my wife could probably say this in memory, is like a shade tree. So being a presence for the people around me that's grounded and able to provide, maybe not even financially, but just generally. But it almost feels like I don't want to pray for that anymore, because the pruning element of that may be so painful to get you to the point where you could be that person that maybe I don't want to pray for that anymore, So I don't know. I just think it's interesting. The one thing I know is that my focus and what I think is important has drastically changed over the last 3-4 years.
Yeah.
One, I would say the prayer that calls you into discomfort, that kind of sucks, because we're like, wait a minute, right? Like, no, I pray to you, you give me stuff I want. And if you don't give me stuff I want, you give me stuff that I didn't know I wanted that's better than the stuff I wanted. Mm-hmm. And there's like, crap, you wait, I'm doing what you said, and then the next 2 years were worse than the previous 3, which is what you said. It's like, hey, this is not how this is supposed to work. This is supposed to work out easy, right? Because that's what we were taught in Sunday school somehow.
Yeah. You told me to be here. I figured this is where you wanted me, and it would be better.
It's funny. I was trying to go through podcast episodes, because in the very beginning, I was kind of a new Christian, all that sort of thing. You guys were asking me questions, and I just remember making a comment, but I couldn't find it. Something about all the Christian people that I know seem to always be going through some sort of a catastrophe. And so I go back and look it up, and the Bible basically says that God, challenges and corrects his kids that he loves, and maybe not so much the ones that aren't his, which is interesting too. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, man, that's what I tell when I think I've used this example before, but I had a good buddy back in the day that lost his job, and then he was like questioning whether or not God existed. I was like, oh, okay. So yesterday, and I tend to be pretty straightforward and blunt. I was like, oh, so yesterday when you had a job, God existed, but now the creator of the universe isn't a real thing. Now you're a highly evolved chimp. Like, you idiot. Like, what's wrong with you? But it's just like, we get there though. But for the Christian, it's like, all right, we believe in God, we believe in the gospel and propitiation, all that stuff. We just don't believe he's good anymore.
Yeah.
Like, if we were to be honest, we'd be like, I just don't think you're good.
Believe that or believe in.
Right. Because to a degree, we believe that God's, our cosmic genie, that we get to, rub the lamp and get whatever he says.
Which is why I need my things we've survived list.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I was reading a commentary, you brought it up, and I was just like, oh man, this goes right into it. So it's by nature, we are all pagans caught in the Babel syndrome. When we think we can manipulate God by praying in Jesus' name to achieve selfish purposes, our paganism is showing. When we claim promises as a means of making God to do what we want him to do, our paganism is showing. When we come to think we are indispensable to God because of the money we donate, the talents we have, the ministries we engage in, or the worship we offer, our paganism is showing. Needy gods can only be oppressive gods.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, isn't that how a lot of us do pray? And so that's one thing that I've had to switch up even this year with my prayer, with how I pray with my family, because you should just be prayers of thankfulness, because that's pretty easy because you have stuff. So you're like, thank you for my kids' school. Thank you for our house. Thank you for our food and all that. And because you're trying to get prayers that your kids can kind of wrap their minds around. But I had someone, I can't remember, I'd like to be able to give the guy credit, but I forget. He just says, hey, describe how you, pray over your kids. And so I start talking and he goes, no, you didn't hear me. I said, pray over your kids. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? He's like, no, I hear you praying like near your kids. Like, and you already admitted that you've prayed about your kids, like when you're not with them, but what do you pray over them? I was like, well, I guess I don't. He's like, yeah, your kids are listening to you though. So do you have an aspirational identity that you have for each one of your kids? And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, well, tell me about it. Well, I want them to be Christians. I want them to be resilient. I want them to be strong. I want them to be courageous. I want to be tough, but I also want them to be tender and sensitive in the right moments. I want them to be meek in the true sense of the word and all that. And he goes, okay, pray that over your children out loud. And I was like, oh. And so now the prayers are like, I'll let them pray. I'll let the little kids pray, but then I will pray over them and I'll say, Lord, I pray that you will make James and Elijah strong, courageous men of God, but that they will also be meek and sensitive. And Lord, I just thank you for the talents that you've put in. Thank you for James's this, and this. And thank you for Eli's this, and this. And it's like they're hearing it. And there was something that even just came out yesterday or the day before. So obviously everyone that listened to the show last year, when Roman the Giant died, that was obviously a, really rough time for me and all that. I think I mentioned on the show that I had, James and Eli out there with us when we were burying him. And so, James was just turned 4 and Eli was 2 years old. And so James was obviously very verbal. And so, even after we buried the dog, the very next day, James was like, hey, is Roman coming back? Or like, what are we doing? And so it's just like, I'm sitting there like still mopping up snot from all this. And I'm trying to explain to a 4-year-old that no, Roman doesn't come back. But the 2-year-old at the time, he's saying 1 or 2 words at a time, right? So he's not putting together sentences or asking questions that, you can even understand. But like 2 nights ago, because he's still 2, but he's further down the road. He can kind of put some sentences together. He was asking very specific questions about Roman's burial. I just had him out there and I just assumed he wasn't picking up on any of this. Well, he picked up on all of it. He just didn't know how to express it. Also, a few months ago, James, our 4-year-old, out of nowhere started asking a lot of questions about death and about sickness. And Daddy, would you be sad if I died? And I'm just like, oh, yeah, buddy, of course I would be so sad if you died, blah, blah, blah. And we'll see if I can get through describing this. But when Roman died suddenly, they don't just throw your dog in the back of your car. They, put him in a biodegradable bag if you're going to be disposing of them yourself, right? Anyway. And so before we put Roman in the ground, like he was in this biodegradable bag, I unzip it so that we can say goodbye. And then I zip it back and we put him in the ground. Well, my wife's like cleaning his closet one day or like putting the toys away. And he points at a bag on the shelf that like had some sort of baby thing in it. And he's like, is that the bag y'all are going to bury me in? He had seen that bag while he was playing weeks ahead of time. And it looked just like the bag we buried Roman in. And all of a sudden, because again, that's just a bag, right? No, that meant something to James. He remembered that bag, and now he sees a bag in his closet, and he's like, "Oh, I wonder if that's my bag." And now he's thinking about, death. He's 4 years old, and now he's thinking about, will there be emotions from mommy and daddy like there were emotions when Roman had died? And so I say all that to say, your kids are picking up on things, how you're handling tough situations, how you're handling anxiety, like how you're praying over them and for them, even through the fire, even when you're mad at them, even when you just want to strangle to death, you just want to strangle everything out of them because they're just driving you nuts. Man, they're picking up on all that. And all that is downstream of resilience and just straight up paying attention.
Yeah.
And so I don't know who needed to hear in the audience today. Again, this was not the plan for the first 40 minutes or so of Genesis 12 discussion, but
hey, praying over just
yes,
one little piece.
hit it.
I heard this. So I've been doing it for like 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years. When I'm with my kids, praying over them in some sense, I always bring up, because I heard somebody do this, the future husband for my wife and daughter wife for my son, and kind of set the expectations for what that looks like and that we're praying for that person. So eventually, if I'm lucky enough to meet you, you can go back and listen to this, but we have high expectations. We've been praying for a long time. So
yeah, if either one of y'all, this is a time capsule right now. So we're going to go right back to this episode. Before we wrap up Genesis 12, just want to remind you guys that we do have affiliations with Logos Bible Software and with Crossway. Logos is the best Bible software on planet Earth, but guys, don't use it at full price. Use it at a discount. If you go to the show notes, there is a link there where you can try out the Logos Bible software at a tremendous discount. We've got that there for you. And then also Crossway is a great publishing partner. We've had on a lot of their authors that we've interviewed on the show, but they put together a forging table starter set. And so it's got a Bible, a journal, a few other books, in a devotional, and you can get that set of 5 books at 50% off, but you just have to follow the instructions. It's very, very easy to do. Follow the instructions that are in the show notes. And guys, so like if you're on Spotify or Apple, like click on this particular episode, and below there you'll see a little link that says episode notes and links, and then there will be a link that you can just click on and go right to the show notes. But let's get to the second half and wrap up Genesis 12. So I believe, Jake, you read. So Adam, you are up from the NIV, starting in verse 10 and finish up Genesis 12. So that's through verse 20.
Genesis 12, verses 10. Now there was famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. They will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had.
So obviously, if you've read through Genesis, this is one of those stories that sticks out because, Sarai was made Pharaoh's wife. So essentially, Abram whored out his wife to save himself. Didn't exactly ask her opinion on the arrangement, but that is what he did. And you can kind of see from the story here, because, there are a lot of layers here, but we'll be fairly brief in our commentary to wrap up Genesis 12. He didn't think God would protect him. And isn't it so funny when you read to the bottom, who bailed him out in the end? God. Mm-hmm. But the reason he did, and I think this goes, Adam, to what you said earlier, which I would echo. I have the same issue. Joby tells people, pray, guess, go. I just skip to the guess, go part, right? To where it's like, God, you gave me a mind to reckon. You gave me wisdom. You gave me discernment. And so I'm just going to go, right? I'm just going to make a call and I'm going to go. Well, so Abram did that. He made the call because he's like, all right, well, God's going to make a nation through me, but I got to help him. I got to help God out. God didn't foresee this happening, right? And so I'm going to offer up my wife basically to be one of Pharaoh's concubines temporarily so that I can save my neck. And, we can't know because we don't live in a parallel universe what would have happened if Abram had not done this. But we can assume because of God's call to Abram that it would have worked out just fine. But this is a fairly significant bump in the road.
Not to mention that he accumulated wealth and servants and donkeys and cattle and everything else along the way in consideration of that, which is pretty interesting that you're willing to give up your wife in order to accumulate those things. But then you do also mention at the end, and it's kind of surprising. You get to the end and you would think Pharaoh should be pretty pissed at this point. And you would not think that Pharaoh would just let him go. You would be like, all right, he should have died. There's no reason for him to be let go other than that's what God's plan was.
Anybody else find it interesting that this is the first Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go?
Yeah. And Charleston Heston didn't even have to ask.
I know. It's kind of full circle. I don't know. Sure. I was just kind of
pre-circle.
It is.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that we don't. I mean, to your point, we don't know what kind of what's the word I'm looking for? What Pharaoh experienced as a result of God. If it was that bad, then maybe he doesn't want to hurt him.
The reason the Israelites were let go is because it was so terrible eventually, and that maybe he was already at that point.
Because it doesn't spend any time talking about it, really.
Right.
Yeah, there's really not a whole lot of description as to Pharaoh here. He's basically just a footnote in the story.
But God does afflict them with great plagues.
Yeah,
afflicts Pharaoh with great plagues. I mean, it's interesting that you have a little miniature picture of Exodus before Exodus actually happens. Mm-hmm. So, because every one of those Jewish people can trace their lineage back to the man who was let go first.
What's the statement? I've kind of forgot it, but it's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it echoes. It's kind of something like that. So when people say history repeats itself, it's like, well, not really, because it's a new time and a new people group, but it certainly echoes.
Yeah.
And so when you look back at something, because that's what I was trying to describe to people on another forging table, I was like, man, last year with the election, everyone's like, this is going to be both sides. This is the last election this country's ever going to have. And I was like, there have been worse times, let's just say in the history of humanity. Like, when people are like, we're closer to Armageddon than we've ever been. Things are crazier than they've ever been. I'm like, did you live during the early 20th century?
Right.
Crazier than it's ever been. Trench warfare in Europe twice, right? The eradication of 7 million Jews. Like, Hitler got pretty darn close to eradicating a race of people.
Yeah.
Like, awkwardly close. And so it's like, no, like it may seem bad right now, but like if you look at this in 100-year history chunk and not 100-hour history chunk, is this even something that registers?
Right.
Because if the answer is no, move on.
Nuclear fallout drills in the 70s and the 80s.
Oh my gosh.
We're afraid the Russians are going to drop nukes on our heads.
And getting under your desk at school would have saved you, right?
Which is great. I can't remember I read this, but there was something along the lines of that human beings actually require a certain amount of problems in their life.
Like resistance, tension. Yep.
Yes. And so
if it's not there, we'll create it.
If it's not there, we'll create it. So, we're talking about last elections ever. And it's like, well, why are we talking about that? Well, because we live in the most peaceful time we ever lived. Probably because we have, more resources than we've ever had. Probably because nobody in this country is really starving, unless it's almost self-imposed. You can absolutely go out and get any sort of help that you need. So there's just like, it's almost the supply and demand for problems is maybe a little bit off. So we seek them out and create them whole cloth. Just, it's the idea of creating chaos to manage it. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyways, it's just kind of interesting what we've decided to put into our minds. And I think this does go back to Abram going into Egypt and not relying on God here. And it's Abram walks in, as he's going in, he's going, yeah, they're going to kill me when they find out I'm your husband because they're going to want you. And it's like, well, I'm going to create this problem out of my own head.
Right.
Despite what God has told me, despite the covenant that's been made. Yeah, I don't believe you. And let me just create this problem.
It's an over-engineering problem to a degree. And that's like, when I talk to people that are like preppers, and I'm not like anti-prepping and having like water sources and protection for your family and stuff like that. But then when you have these guys that are like digging trenches under their houses and putting barbed wire up around and different things like that, it's like, okay, guys, this is what I said on Mike Glover's podcast, because he has a large prepper community and he really, really helps those guys out. And again, I'm not anti that stuff, but it's like, all right, well, you got the $100,000 Raptor, you got your go bag, you got your, hidden place up in the mountains that no one knows about except for you and everybody else. And you got your bunker and you got all that stuff. Well, eventually there's going to be another chimp that outlives you. And all you've done is make it easier for him to have supplies. Right. And so it's like you've done all this time and effort. You put all this into preparing for this life and none for the next one. Right. And so it's like, at whatever point you meet your end, you're going to meet your maker. So why don't you spend some time preparing for that meeting, right? As opposed to like preparing for if, there's a bomb that's dropped and all of a sudden we can't make cell phone calls.
Right. Yeah. My wife, she's not a prepper, but she definitely has a mindset of, well, I need to have some things just in case. There's actually a empty 50-gallon barrel in our carport right now that's hidden away that, we're supposed to fill with water. And I'm just going, I'm not doing that. Cause I just kind of figure like, okay, look, if anything were to happen, believe it or not, Oklahoma City is like very high on any sort of target list. So we're probably going to get wiped out there anyway. But at the same time, it's like, look, if there's truly Armageddon that's coming, ideally we're not here.
Right.
So what am I worried about?
Yeah, we got zip zap somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right.
I hope so. I hope it works like that. But yeah, I mean, the idea of prepping, it seems odd to me that a Christian would be a prepper. It just, to me, it's two things that they're a little incongruous. And I mean, no judgment if that's something that you've decided to do. I don't think it's, again, prepping is not salvific, I guess I would say. But at the same time, where's your faith? You're putting your faith in yourself in those times. And I think that there is an element that, yeah, maybe you ought to put your faith somewhere else. Maybe put your faith in God.
Yeah, and don't hear what Jake's not saying. He's not saying that if you've got that 50-gallon barrel that's full of water, that somehow you don't have faith. Right. He's not saying that you don't have faith, but again, it's like, how much time and effort are you putting into that versus, the salvation of your children or the rest of the people that are in your group?
And there's reasonable responses. I mean, we live in Oklahoma, right? So I think the first 72 are on you and all that kind of thing are just very smart at a minimum. Because if you go through a catastrophe, I mean, there are issues. I've got a friend who went through a tornado several years ago, and he was giving a safety speech before a big meeting. And one of his recommendations is that he mounted a gun safe inside of his tornado shelter because when he got wiped out and came out, he said within 15 minutes, looters were coming through his house, what was left of his house. So there are realities. I don't know that prepping for the zombie apocalypse is necessarily the right thing, but prepping for what could, happen, whether it's natural or not, go for it.
Yeah.
Which I guess if you're a non-believer and you are prepping for the zombie apocalypse, that means you're not going to get zip-zapped somewhere else when there is that fall. And so you do whatever it takes to survive for as long as possible because the next life is going to be really hot. It's not going to be very fun for you.
I wonder if this... I'm sorry, I'm going to go down this zombie apocalypse trail real quick. I wonder if the rapture, literally just the shells of our bodies, now soulless, are the zombies.
You know what, guys? We're gonna leave that rock in your shoe
because the angels come in and they.
No, I don't want us to give any more legs to that.
Context.
I just want to bother everyone listening and watching this right now. That is the end of our discussion of Genesis 12. But guys,
Christian's
come back
final
here.
Revenge.
That's right. Come back here next week where we're going to dig into Genesis 13 and 14. So we're back up to doing a couple of chapters. So Genesis 13 and 14 for next week. But before I let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost at Undaunted.Life. Our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Don't forget about the Crossway Starter Set and the Logos Bible software. And we have a donation link there in the show notes as well. Guys, Undaunted.Life/donate. We can't do anything. Like, guys, when I look back on the last few years of Undaunted Life, if we didn't have donors, we didn't have guys like you giving $5 a month, $25 a month to what we were doing, we would not have been able to do the forging table because we wouldn't have had the money to put all this stuff together and to take the risks that we're doing. But guys, because we have become the #1 podcast in the world for Christian men. And that's because of you guys and what we've been able to do. So if you want more guys around the world that think like you to see and find this information so that can help them and equip them to push back darkness, hop on board and be a donor.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.